and welcome to Mystic Dog Mama, the podcast for soul-led dog mamas, where you'll discover how to best nourish your dog and yourself, mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Dr. Alexia Meller. Thank you so much for being here with me for this week's episode, where I talk to renowned veterinarian, Dr. Tom Lonsdale. I'm excited for every episode that I share with you, but I've been really eager to share this particular conversation with all of you Mystic Dog Mamas who, like me, are always keen to learn more about how to best feed your dog. The world of canine nutrition can be overwhelming and confusing, to say the least. So throughout this podcast, I will be bringing different experts from the fresh feeding world to talk to you about their perspectives and philosophies on how to provide your dog with the optimum diet. And it's my hope that in doing so, you'll be able to find approaches that resonate with you and your pup. As always, if you have specific questions about anything related to feeding your dog, or you want me to cover a particular nutrition topic in an episode, please reach out to me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama. I wanted to start these conversations around nutrition by going back to the basics, but also with a topic that I see so many people struggling with when it comes to fresh food feeding, and that's the subject of raw meaty bones. For those that may be new to this term, raw meaty bones, or you might see it written as RMBs, are actually just what they sound like. Raw bones with some meat left on them that allow your dogs to indulge their canine nature by ripping, tearing, and crunching. This is different from providing ground bone or bone meal in raw minces. Yes, the ground bones provide valuable minerals, but as Dr. Tom Lonsdale will talk about, the value of raw meaty bones is that through the ripping, tearing, and crunching that they require, they provide the key to the carnivore code, which is that they help keep the dog's teeth and gums free of harmful bacteria, which can lead to a whole host of other health problems, including things like kidney disease. Dr. Lonsdale's perspective is that if you only take one thing away from this chat, it's that ditching the commercial kibbles and replacing them with raw meaty bones will improve your dog's physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health. To give you some background, Dr. Tom Lonsdale has dedicated himself to protecting pets for 5 decades as a highly respected and accomplished veterinarian with more than 50 years of experience in the field. He has become one of the world's leading natural feeding experts and the preeminent advocate for raw meaty bones. He first began to suspect that an industrial diet of highly processed commercial pet food could be causing a wide range of serious health issues for dogs and cats in the late 1980s. He discovered, to pet owners' delight, that numerous ailments, not least the visible dental and gum disease that seems endemic in the pet population, could be rectified by swapping what he refers to as junk pet food for high-quality raw meaty bones. This marked the beginning of 3 decades of observation, research, and campaigning to improve the health and well-being of pets through a diet of raw meaty bones. As well as helping pet owners and their pets through the advocacy of raw meaty bones, he has given voice to the voiceless by consistently calling for global pet food manufacturers and those veterinary schools and practices that he accuses of colluding with pet food manufacturers to be held accountable for their actions. Dr. Lonsdale believes they are deceiving pet owners and harming pets by selectively ignoring scientific fact around the inadequacy of junk pet food in the pursuit of profit maximization. Dr. Lonsdale writes extensively on the link between diet and periodontal disease and how raw meaty bones are the key to a healthy carnivore. His books include Raw Meaty Bones Promote Health, Work Wonders, Feed Your Dog Raw Meaty Bones, and his latest multi-billion-dollar pet food fraud, Hiding in Plain Sight. In this conversation, Dr. Lonsdale and I talk about how he came to the realization that raw meaty bones are the key to the carnivore code, and how he awoke from a dream one Christmas morning in the early 1990s with his cybernetics and periodontal disease hypothesis fully formed. This hypothesis suggests that nature operates through a series of interconnected feedback loops, and the way she helps to keep the carnivore population in check is through periodontal disease. It's a fascinating topic, and I know you're going to love hearing him talk about it. He also shares his touching and heartfelt response to my question of what dogs have taught him about what it means to be human. And one final note before we get started is that this episode is supported by Aspirationary, which, in full transparency, is another project of mine where we create books, notebooks, and stationery to help you become all you aspire to be. Come check out our Moon Magic and Shadow Work journals and workbooks on our Aspirationary Instagram account. That's spelled ASPIRATIONERY. I'll leave the link in the show notes. Okay, that's enough of an intro, so let's go. Dr. Tom Lonsdale, thank you so much for joining me on the Mystic Dog Mama podcast. It is such a pleasure to have you here.
Terrific pleasure for me, and wonderful to know that you're in Baja California, all those miles away, and that we can have this discussion. Extraordinary.
I know. It is really wonderful. The power of technology. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, with the podcast overall, one of my missions is really to look at how we can nourish our dogs, ourselves, and the planet, mind, body, and soul. And so with that, I'm inviting people to have a variety of conversations that address various components of that. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is because I feel as though your work with quite literally writing the book on Raw Meaty Bones actually ticks all of those boxes with looking at how we best nourish our dog's body from a physical perspective, how Raw Meaty Bones give dogs the opportunity for enrichment, so therefore engaging them on a mental level. And actually, one of the things I really loved in both reading your books as well as some of the podcast episodes that I've heard you speak on is about the spiritual component, actually, that kind of spiritual joy of watching your dog with a raw meaty bone and knowing that they are living their ultimate carnivore life as they're engaging with this. So I'm really excited to have a conversation with you today about that.
Splendid. Yeah. I find it most uplifting. And every time I see a dog eating its proper food, I get that tingle of excitement, of interest, of the feeling of belonging. And it's great.
Absolutely. One of the things that I was hoping you could talk about around raw meaty bones, there's often a lot of confusion for pet parents around the way that bones are kind of described as either edible or recreational. And there's a lot of fear for some pet parents around actually feeding bones because they've been told that they can fracture their teeth, they could create obstruction, etc. I was wondering if you could kind of give a Raw Meaty Bones 101 for somebody who's trying to understand what this actually is and what is the benefit to their dog.
Okay, well, it's a big question with many different components. But the first thing to do is for the listener or the viewer here today to disabuse themselves of all that nonsense that they believe was true and to talk about the edible bone and the recreational bone and so on. This is utter nonsense that's being peddled by devious people with an unpleasant agenda, in my view. We made it clear back in the early 90s that the raw meaty bones are the key to the carnivore code. Indeed, in 1992, Christmas morning, I woke up with the cybernetic hypothesis of periodontal disease in my brain that had been implanted there spiritually or mystically, if you like, in the night, and I wrote it down. The raw meaty bones are the key to the carnivore code. They're the sine qua non. They're the absolute must-have for your carnivore. That's why the wolf pack is prepared to run 40 kilometers through deep snow in the hope, only the hope, of bringing down a moose. It's that important to them to be able to sink their canine teeth into the hide and rip and tear the flesh and the sinews and then crunch the bone. Mm-hmm. This is absolutely at the core of their being. That's why Aesop's fables depict the dog with the bone on the bridge, and it sees its reflection and is so keen to get that bone that the other dog has got in its estimation that it growls and of course drops its bone. And so there's various morals to that story, but central to it is that the bone is so important. I mean, we have these concepts of, you talk about somebody who's completely obsessive and you say he's like a dog with a bone. Right. Dogs obsess about these things. It's so important. It's how they stimulate their brain chemicals, how they gain satisfaction as having been a big, tough, strong carnivore that defeated the prey and brought it down and have the reward now of being able to rip and tear and chew. So it's critically, critically important to them. And unfortunately, that has been completely traduced by the canned and kibble makers. And then all the so-called raw feeders are equally bad. They rush straight past raw meaty bones and dive straight into the dog's bowl filled with mush, minced meat and vegetables and kefir supplement. And I despair. I utterly despair. So the key to the carnivore code is raw meaty bones. Everyone needs to know that. That is not nutrition, that is feeding 101. We should not even be talking about nutrition. It's nonsense to talk about what do we mean by arachidonic acid or taurine or the various proteins or whatever. These are just English words. I mean, if you use Chinese or Mexican, or that's Spanish, I suppose, it would equally be unintelligible to people. They will bandy the words about, but they're only words. If you gave people 5 piles of granules and said, well, which one's the taurine, they'd look at you completely mystified and have no idea. But yet on chat groups, on the internet, on YouTube and Facebook and all, they'll happily talk about all these things as if they're incredibly knowledgeable. But actually, they've got no clue. And they're talking, and it's a complete distraction to be talking about the various components. Mr. and Mrs. Caveman knew how to feed the wolves that were lurking around the cave entrance. They just shut the leftovers out the door, and the wolves attacked it. They knew what to do. And now, alas, the owners of the modified wolves have no clue. No clue.
I would agree with you on that. And I think, from my own experience, we were talking briefly before we started the podcast of how I started to get involved into understanding what to feed my dog as a result of him having health issues when he was younger. And when you're trying to find your own guidance for that, and you go into the abyss that is Google, for example, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming, and it can feel incredibly frightening. And if you're somebody like me who loves your dog dearly, and you see it as your responsibility to do the best that you can, it can feel so overwhelming that there's a temptation to give into transferring your authority and your agency and your intuitive knowing over to a company or somebody that presents as an authority to tell you what to do. And I think that's where a lot of pet parents find themselves really conflicted with recognizing they don't necessarily know where to get the information. And when you do go into that abyss of Google, there is just so much. Where do we even start to sift through? And the kind of irony, I think, is that your proposal of raw meaty bones being the basis in some respects can feel too simple for us. Like, well, what do you mean? Because I've heard you need to have all of these other things, right? I've been told.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you've heard all the nonsense. That's the trouble. So, like I said earlier, the first thing you need to do is disabuse yourself of that nonsense. So you have to try and empty your mind of it, because that's very difficult. So for most people, then it's just a case of putting things in suspense. Just put them over there and hold them as being questionable truths that you hitherto believe implicitly. Just put them there. Then go back to basics. And look, I would recommend anybody looking at this podcast to simply get a copy of Work Wonders, Feed Your Dog Raw Meaty Bones. And that's it, in 120 pages. That's all the information that you need. Do that, and don't worry yourself any further. You spend some time looking at my YouTube channel videos and TV shows. That would be handy. So see the visual moving images, learn from what the dogs and cats teach you. And it's as simple as in every one, they're ripping and tearing at their raw meaty bones. And that's the answer, pure and simple. You don't need anything beyond that. Going on about must give liver, must give pancreas, must give tripe, not true. Many of my clients only ever fed chicken wings and chicken frames and nothing else. Simple as. Now, clearly, that is not the whole carcass. It certainly isn't the carcass complete with fur, feathers, and fins, the ideal, with the guts intact. But it's good enough. Nature is tolerant, very tolerant, gives wide latitude. And if, for instance, there's not much vitamin A in muscle, it doesn't matter. You don't have to give liver just in order to get a big dose, because there's enough in the carcass, in the raw meaty bones, for the animals to live wonderfully well. At this time, there's been no longitudinal studies to compare raw meaty bones with junk food in the can or the sachet, nor has it have the studies been done to compare with the BAF and the prey model and whatever. And they won't be done. They won't be done for many years. But does that mean that you should worry yourself about what that minor differentiation is? Answer no. We've had 30 years of just feeding raw meaty bones, and the clinical evidence is wonderfully uplifting. And it's in all of my videos there. There's another group of videos before and after that you can find on the Pet Food Con. And very good for people to go and have a look at that.
I will include the links. I will include the links to that in the show notes so people can easily navigate to that.
Yeah, I think that would be, and it will take them quite a long time to look at those, because we show the before and the after, and the time, what we start with and what we finish with. Most of those, of course, involve animals that have been poisoned with the junk food over an extended period, and then they tend to have quite severe dental disease. So besides stopping doing the junk food thing, so that's the number one thing for people watching this video. Stop doing the bad stuff. Stop giving the canned and the dry. Stop giving the bath. Stop giving the minced vegetables and all the rubbish. Stop doing that. But then pay attention to that fundamental need for the dogs and cats as well to rip and tear and chew and stimulate the endorphins in the brain, tell the stomach that something's on the way down, and therefore get the digestive enzymes flowing and so on.
Right.
So these are the things that people need to do. Stop doing the bad stuff. Keep their thoughts as to what they've been told by so many self-styled experts. Keep those in abeyance. Get yourself some big pieces of raw meaty bones. Chuck them to your cat, dog, puppy, kitten, and learn from what they teach you. That's what you should do.
That's beautiful. And it's something that we're quite afraid of doing in many respects. And yet it's so fundamental, that trusting that your dog knows exactly what it needs. And we see trends of this coming back up with like Caroline Ingraham developing zoo pharmacognosy, essentially self-selection. How can you present, watching how animals in the wild will self-select medicines, etc., or they'll eat certain things where they just know that that's what they need, and they'll refuse other things because they don't need it at that time. And if we're honest with ourselves, when we actually listen to our own bodies, and I actually think that that's part of the core reason we are distrustful of how we feed our dogs, because we have become so disconnected in many respects from our own food systems and from our own bodies that we don't necessarily listen to what it is that what we actually need. But if we can regain that sense of trust in our dog and allow them to lead us to show, and not be afraid, if your dog doesn't want to eat one day, it doesn't automatically mean your dog's really ill and you need to run to the vet. I think there's that kind of mentality as well of, if they're not doing exactly what I've been told that they should be doing, then there's something wrong. Or if they've decided that they're not eating liver, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I need to get that into them, that kind of a thing. And so it really is about a conversation and about developing a sense of trust. Yeah.
For sure, and learning from your dog. And so that's why I say this is a fantastic experiment that can be run in the lounge rooms of the world, and people can see their pet carnivore being transformed in health before their very eyes in the space of about a week. Ordinarily, when you start off with a junk food fed dog or cat, and once you change it over, then a week later, ordinarily, you can see a major transformation. You might see it even within days. And you'll see, of course, the breath will improve straight away. So all those toxic fumes that were otherwise going to the heavens, and the toxic juices from the teeth and gums going in the circulatory system, that stops. The hair coat will improve. I mean, there were two Rhodesian Ridgebacks belonging to a lady, and she came in a couple of weeks after she'd made the transition. She said one had changed colour and the other had got a silky coat. And this was really noticeable that she could, well, why would the dog change colour? Not dramatically. I mean, it just went from a mousy brown to a copper coloured hue. Well, of course, because the hair follicles were then growing in healthy skin. So the hair was growing in the hair follicles, and the follicles were in the healthy skin, and the healthy skin covered a healthy body with a healthy immune system and a healthy liver and healthy kidneys and so on. So that's why these hair follicles started to produce more pigment in the hair. And that's the sort of thing that you genuinely can see. So now, people will see this for themselves, but let me go back again and say, look, go and watch the videos. Go and see the videos and gain confidence right from the get-go that this has been done now for 30 years on a regular basis, that I ran a veterinary clinic where I had responsibility for the patients under my care, and I had to treat my clients with fairness and integrity. So everything I'm saying now is what I was doing on a one-to-one basis for the last 30-odd years, regularly, without variation. We were always looking out for things where we might have got things wrong, needed to improve. So, okay, in that regard, the less processing you do, the better. Ideally, you feed complete with fur, feathers, and fins, as the carnivore would pull down in the wild. So in your own case with the Chihuahua, well, your feathers would be on day-old chicks or partridges or pigeons or something. You would get fish about yay big, whole, complete with scales and fins.
Yeah.
And if you could get rats and mice and small rabbits, that sort of thing would be the ideal. The next best thing is, well, in your case, chicken wings. even they are probably too bony and too risky, and they can bite off shards of even cooked bone, even raw bone. So you really, half a chicken would be a better go. Let your dog rip and tear and chew, get all those endorphins traveling round, clean the teeth, tell the stomach something's on the way down. And let your dog eat that today, and then in the fridge overnight, bring it out the next day, and let him or her finish it off. But if she doesn't choose to because she had a big feed the day before, fine, put it back in the fridge.
Right.
And you can do that over several days.
Right.
But always start big. Don't be mincing and chopping and forming different recipes according to the latest guru self-styled on the internet. Don't do it. Just avoid all of that rubbish, nonsense. And don't have a bowl. Or maybe for convenience, it might suit you to put your raw meaty bone in a bowl as you carry it to the outside. Out on the lawn is a good place if you've got. If you don't, well, even in the backyard, on concrete, anywhere. But again, look at the video. See where my patients have been feeding on their raw meaty bones and see how they do it.
Yeah. Yes. And I'd like to circle back to how you initially came to some of these conclusions. And you had mentioned that it was primarily because of the amount of periodontal disease that you were seeing in patients. Is that right?
That was the big trigger. Yeah. The question. Finally, it took me 20 years to wake up to that. I'm a bit of a slow learner, I'm sorry. But eventually came to understand. And there was talk from some of my colleagues, Brett Muir, Alan Bennett, even Ian Billinghurst, at that time was prepared to accentuate the needs for raw meaty bones until he started to make his mince mush. But the discussion back then in the late 80s and early 90s, and we had a pretty furious letter writing campaign in the pages of the Australian Veterinary Journal and the Australian Veterinary News. And so people really started to take account of this at that time. For me, it was probably what I've been questing for the past 20 or 30 years. I knew there was something intuitively not right. And the more I looked into this, the more I saw that this massive issue that we had effectively modified the wolves and then insisted that they be fed on this modified, well, it's not even modified food. It's completely alien and different. And it was a rich field of inquiry. And so we dug deep and found every stone we turned, we found new information under it. It was an amazing period of discovery. It was like exploring not just a new continent, a new planet. It was like actually getting in a spaceship and going to a new and undiscovered planet. And there was information everywhere. Oh, it was an extraordinary period of exhilaration every day. Between 1991 and 93, I was just completely besotted with this information that was just coming from every quarter. I sent a letter to Dr. Douglas Bryden, who was the director of the Centre for Veterinary Education at that time at Sydney University. And I twisted his arm mightily. I said he should come out to my practice. It would be worth his effort 1,000-fold to get in his car and come and see what we were doing. And well, you say that even to Elon Musk, if it was worth his while 1,000-fold, then he would make squillions more dollars. He would still come out to our practice, I reckon. Anyone who you could promise them 1,000-fold investment on return on their investment, they would come out. So anyway, Dr. Bryden, there was an angry voice on the phone one day, and I answered, and he said, Dr. Bryden here. Oh, Dr. Bryden. Yes, I'll be out on Friday. Oh, yes, thank you, Dr. Bryden. What time, Dr. Bryden? 7 o'clock. Will that be AM or PM, Dr. Bryden? AM. This terse reply came. Very well, Dr. Bryden. We'll see you at 7 o'clock on Friday. Well, we organised the breakfast welcome. So we had croissants in the oven. We had coffee on the hob, some fine blackcurrant jam, probably Scottish blackcurrant jam, very special. And and he came and he arrived at the appointed hour, 7 a.m. He'd driven an hour from Sydney, so he got up really early to get to us. And I said, oh, how long will you be here, Dr. Brown? Oh, half an hour. 5 hours later, he staggered out a changed man.
Wow.
Now, he pretty much there was one other veterinary dentist who came out one time, but I think over the 20 or 30 years, he's the only vet that's actually visited, but he did. And a few days later, the call came and he said, right, well, look, write all that down and give it to me, and I'll give it to Dr. Stephen Coles, who's running the veterinary dentistry course, and he will then be able to disseminate that information. And I refused. I said, I'm not going to give it to Stephen Coles, who's in in cahoots with the junk pet food industry. In no way. As much as I wanted the information to be got out to a wider audience, I declined. A couple of days later, the call comes again. Write it down yourself then. I said, well, yes, Dr. Bryden, but I'm taking my 2 young sons on a parental access 2-week holiday, and tomorrow, get it to me in 2 weeks, he said. Oh, okay. So I put my young sons to bed and sat out by the veranda the street lights on the balcony. And I wrote this chapter to a book, and that was published in 1993, and it's the preventative dentistry chapter. So that was the first and last word on how you feed your dog and look after its teeth and gums. And it was published by the University of Sydney at the direction of Dr. Douglas Bryden. But it's mostly been marked by inattention, by being ignored by vets, and certainly by the internet gurus who hold forth on how you should feed your dog. But there you are, it was written in early 93, 2 weeks in February, I think it was, published in June of that year, and it stood the test of time. So that's 30 years, isn't it?
It is. It
30 years. And I recommend it to all people to just simply go and have a look at that. I lead off with the concepts of cybernetics and how the interconnectivity of everything and how vitally important that is. Still yarning about this. So after Dr. Bryden came that time, I gave him a copy of James Lovelock's Gaia, A New Look at Life on Earth, I think it is the subtitle. But anyway, Gaia, Gaia. And he took it and he said, yeah, he read it in one session, sitting under a tree with his back to the tree trunk. And he was blown away by that particular book. A couple of years later, well, no, not maybe a year later, I sent him my cybernetic hypothesis of periodontal disease in mammalian carnivores. And I asked him to publish it. I said I was having difficulty finding a publisher. The Australian Veterinary Journal had rejected it and said that it would even invite legal action from the pet food companies for even considering what I was saying. And he looked at this article that I sent to him, and he declined to publish it as well. But on the grounds, he said, it was too important for him to publish.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah. So here was somebody who really did fully understand what we were going on about as of his 5-hour meeting in our practice, and all the information that I sent him across his desk over the succeeding months and years. And he said, no, I won't. Lo and behold, though, I'm blown away by this fact. But I submitted it to the Journal of Veterinary Dentistry in America, who did publish it. And it's there on the internet for all to see from that time.
Wow.
But again, it's been studiously ignored. The Journal of Veterinary Dentistry, obviously behind the scenes, talked amongst themselves, saw the importance of this, and probably without due regard to their own safety and security, published it. But once it was published, I suspect people saw that, oh, that offends the big players, the junk pet food titans and the university deans of veterinary schools and so on. So everyone now it's almost impossible to get anyone to talk about it.
Mm. Mm.
So that's the sort of history of this.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd like you to talk a bit more about the theory itself. And specifically, so you've mentioned, for those who are not familiar with Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis, that's the notion that the Earth is a living ecosystem, that everything is interconnected. And your theory, your hypothesis of cybernetics draws upon that, and specifically looking at cybernetics being the ways in which various systems are communicating with one another. And that sense of a feedback loop is kind of critical to it. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about what you have included in that hypothesis, and specifically how that relates to periodontal disease.
Excuse me. Well, okay, James Lovelock, he conceived of this idea that the Earth is like a living entity with a physiology. It has an anatomy, of course. It has continents and oceans and atmospheres and so on. That's its anatomy. But the physiology, it all interlinks, and then he then started to cooperate or collaborate with Professor Lynn Margulis, who previously had been married to Carl Sagan, the renowned astronomer. So these are pretty heavy intellectual hitters, really. They're very clever people. And they worked out interconnectivity of many things. And then Margulis in particular used to accentuate that we're all co-evolved. So the simple Darwinian concept of the survival of the fittest and nature red in tooth and claw and all clambering over each other and so on, actually probably not quite right. And that we in some ways, we need our enemies as much as we need our friends. We need death as much as we need life. All right. That's a new sort of way of thinking. And that all elements of our planet grew up together. No one species, no one plant, no one animal, no one anything outstripped all the others. We all came along as individuals and as communities. So this this co-evolution is very important. And then you start to look at what the different elements might be and how they might interrelate, how they might interact. And so, well, to cut to the chase, way back, about 3.5-4 billion years ago, the first microbes on the planet were anaerobes that lived in an oxygen-free atmosphere, and that they emerged from the primeval slime and then started to colonize the planet. They're still here. They haven't changed. and they're in your gums and in your bowel, and they're in the sewerage, and they're in the soil, and they quite likely have been running this planet for their own benefit all that time. Yeah. What? Could that? Yes. Well, and how do they work in carnivore gums? Right. Well, okay. In the age of mammals, and that took place, I don't know, after the dinosaurs went. I can't exactly remember the geological time, but during this age of mammals, and prior to the time when man picked up the club, he became the dominant predator. But prior to that, he was a food source and a competing predator, but he wasn't the dominant one. So the dominant predators were the carnivores, the full-on carnivores with the canine teeth, the big, sharp teeth used for going out and killing their prey. And so the cats and the canids and the bears to an extent. And they were the regulators. So in this balanced ecosystem that James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis are talking about, they talk in general terms. I conceived of this notion in a dream in the night on Christmas night, 1992, that the carnivores were the regulators of the rest of the system, and that they regulated the herbivores, for instance, sheep or deer or goats or whatever, which in turn regulated the herbage. And that's all very well. But what regulates the regulator?
Right.
Because you must have a circle. You can't have a linear progression, because otherwise it runs out of control. So you have to loop it back. And then I started to think, well, maybe the regulator of the supreme regulators here, maybe they're gum disease. And so I guess I'm skipping a few different steps in this, but basically, if the carnivore is ripping and tearing at its prey and therefore doing its job, therefore having its major impact on the environment, because the interface between the carnivore and its environment is actually its teeth. That's where it has the big impact on its environment, which it constitutes its prey. And whatever it's using its teeth to sink into its prey, is doing its job. Therefore, isn't that a good thing? It's got a job to do. But when it ceases to have a job to do, when the prey is too scarce, then suddenly it's not doing its job right. You don't want it to do its job because there's too few of the prey. What happens for this carnivore, which then is not doing its job? Well, this is the time when the anaerobes come to the fore. They were always sitting there in the gums, but now suddenly they get a new waiting for this opportunity. Yeah. And then they flourish. And then they bring about the inflammation, which is characterized by the red and sore gums and the bleeding gums, but also the stinky breath. It's because they give off all these toxic fumes, which are strong smelling, in hydrogen sulfide and other such gases, which to my way of thinking, is another communication system, because the stinky breath then tells all the prey, oh, this is a defective wolf or a defective lion or whatever. The other members of the pack or the community realize that this is one that has not been eating, has not been cleaning its teeth. Therefore, it's on the outer. Therefore, it gets ostracized or even set upon by the rest of the pack. And so you've got all these linkages taking place and communication at a distance. So, you can reckon the prey and other predators would know that if this wolf has got stinky breath, they would know about it, possibly over several hundred meters, maybe even further, just with the odor that comes away from that stinky breath. Simultaneously, and we don't know this, but it's possible that the particular carnivores would be aware of the stinky odor going up its nostrils, but also the taste of the stinky saliva, taste of the foul tasting saliva. It could be that goes up into the vomeronasal organ, because nobody's really explained the purpose of the vomeronasal organ.
That's right.
But if this is a way of sensing the health of the saliva, wouldn't that be a really accurate little mechanism that would tell the individual carnivore its place in the hierarchy and what it needs to do about things?
Mm-hmm.
And some of this is not linear. So, okay, the carnivore goes hungry for a couple of weeks. It's got an empty belly. Its muscles are starting to shrink. It starts to be in trouble. It's got a stinky breath. It's got foul tasting saliva. But then it gets lucky and happens across a dead elephant, for instance. Okay, it can sit there and eat the dead elephant for a couple of weeks, clean up its teeth and gums, regain its strength, and go out hunt again. So it's not all or nothing. It's many interrelated, interconnecting aspects. A very important part of all this, though, is that, and it's in Raw Meaty Bones, the book, and in chapter 2 or 3, that the immune system, that hitherto we've considered the immune system to be here to protect us. Well, yes, the immune system is comprised of many, many different components, lots. And they can be working together or independently or whatever. But they can also, I suggest, be used to kill the patient. So hitherto, when we've said, oh, the immune system must be malfunctioning when you've got hyperimmune disease or autoimmune disease or hypoimmune disease. No, it could be that various feedback loops have told the immune system to go and do the opposite of what it was previously doing. It's two sides of the same coin. Mm-hmm. And I think increasingly, I think people will come to realize that is what probably has been going on. Now, of course, we don't actually want the immune system to kill us, either our patients or ourselves. So it is an opportunity, therefore, to do more research to try and prevent the immune system taking it upon itself to kill the host. But nonetheless, I feel that this is all part of this cybernetic, wonderful system of interconnected signaling systems, where bacteria talk to other bacteria, and bacteria talk to mammalian cells, and mammalian cells talk to mammalian organs, and mammalian organs then produce hormones and or neurological signals and so on within the individual. But then the individual is part of a group or a community, and that group or community then signals to a wider environment, and then the environment feeds back into all of this. Mm-hmm. And so it's all hanging together wonderfully well. And then it's encapsulated in your dog on your hearth rug, ripping and tearing it apart. And you think, whoa, okay, the interconnectivity of all this is wonderful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, it's just beautiful. It really is. I mean, that is part of what I see as the kind of spiritual aspect of all this, like the absolute beauty and the perfection in these interconnected systems is just amazing. And I think one of the fears that I have is how humans have messed with that and continue to mess with that. And a kind of question that I have around those systems and how they're functioning with the ways in which we feed our dogs right now is because we as humans have changed, for example, the way that we do agriculture and the way that we are raising the animals that we are then feeding to our dogs. Many of those animals being raised in absolutely horrific conditions, never seeing the light of day, cramped, and that having an impact obviously on that animal that then gets passed down to our animal. How do you see the future of the way in which we feed our dogs from this perspective of, in order to honor them as carnivores, feeding them these raw meaty bones? When we have drastically changed the structure of the animal, the nutrient contents of the animal, even the way in which trauma is potentially stored within the animal's cells.
I didn't quite hear that. Say that again.
Oh, sorry. The way in which the way how humans have drastically changed. So I guess kind of
I heard that, but yeah,
to go back where, if we're looking at the ways in which wild carnivores have been able to hunt prey, for example, and the way that we have raised animals in such a decrepit way that we are then feeding to our animals. How do you actually envision the future of the way that we are able to support, in this case, dogs being the true carnivores that they are, and thinking of it from this wider system? How do we actually improve the system to ensure that we are able to feed our dogs in an appropriate way?
Well, my view is don't worry about all of that. That is so far down the track that is not a consequence here and now. You can perfectly adequately feed your dog or cat on farmed animals. And the distinction between the jungle fowl perched high in a primordial forest and the chook that's been raised in a factory farm isn't that significant in terms of how that's going to impact the health of the carnivore that eats it. Of greater consequence is that it should rip and tear and chew. It should be the whole barnyard fowl as opposed to the minced fowl. That's the critical thing. Cleaning the teeth, stimulating the brain chemicals, telling the stomach something's on the way down, maintaining the physiology of your carnivore pet. Worrying about esoteric notions about, well, we should actually have gone out with a blowpipe and brought down the jungle fowl and then brought it home is not something that we should concern ourselves with, not at all. You can feed the pork neck bone, you can feed the pig's head from the saddleback or the large white pig. You don't have to go and get a wild boar and drag it back in order to do the right thing by your pet carnivore. Absolutely not. So we should stop worrying about depleted nutrients in the soil and all of that sort of thing. That is so relatively insignificant in the scheme of things that we should just banish the thought. Don't even spend a moment. Don't. The distinction between feeding out of the can and the bag, as opposed to feeding the raw meaty bones, is chalk and cheese. That's the wrong metaphor, but anyway, it's so huge, the difference, that you just don't need to worry. So long as you stop feeding out of the can and the sack and do feed raw meaty bones in big pieces appropriate to the size of your carnivore, you will be doing just fine. In terms, though, of our impact on the environment, then there's a statistic that says 19% of American farmland is given over to the feeding of pets. That is serious. That is very serious in terms of our environmental footprint. The keeping of a Labrador dog is said to involve as much energy usage as driving a mid-range or even large sports utility vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
So we have been pushed into getting these modified wolves into our lives, regardless of the cost. And I think you were saying that we seem to be doing all of these things without proper regard for the environment that sustains us. We all depend on the environment. And we've done this to the detriment to the natural world and all the other inhabitants. Mm-hmm. And we've polluted the planet with carbon dioxide, and we're in a bad situation. So we do need to pull back. And I would suggest to you that 19% of American farmland should not be given over to feeding carnivorous pets. We need to think again. And I think we will think again once we ban, or it's not so much ban, it's just enforce existing laws against false and misleading advertising by the junk pet food companies. So they are engaged in massive fraud, and it's very cruel. It's fraudulent to suggest that their stuff in the can and the sack is suitable and safe. It's also cruel to recommend that carnivores, which we know should be ripping and tearing at the raw meaty bone, should be adequately fed out of their cat and junk, and therefore subject to a lifetime of misery, not only physical but also mental distress, that they can't rip and tear and chew and do what nature intended. So once you enforce the law, all of that will stop. And then I would suggest a lot of people will elect not to get a dog or a cat. And those that do will have a better, fuller understanding of the needs of those animals. And then there'll be much more harmony, and it'll be much better health and a general better vibe. The zeitgeist will be altogether better once we stop the domination of Mars, Nestle, and Colgate, mm-hmm. and what they are doing to the planet, and doing it through us. They're conning our communities to do the worst things for the planet, not the best.
Right.
So my 3 books is all about improving the health of the animals, improving the health of the planet, improving people's appreciation of their place on the planet. And I think you get an uplift from all this once you delve deeply into it.
Yeah.
I encourage people to do so.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I wonder too, because one of the things that you've raised as well is it's not just about the pet food companies having control over the creation of the food and selling it to the general population, but it's these big companies that are even involved in funding veterinary schools, for example. And so vets are then taught about nutrition via these large companies, and then those same vets go and sell that food in their practices. And so much of the vet's practice in terms of the income is reliant upon that relationship. And I wonder what you see as the kind of future for the veterinary industry. Should that be changed?
Right. It needs to be changed. And I'm going to cough, excuse me. Yes, of course. And once people read the 3 books, these things that I'm advertising up here, they will come to understand that the veterinary profession has really been a massive criminal cult that has been defrauding the customers and being cruel to the patients under their care. You can't see it in any other way. Doug Bryden saw that in 1993 when he said, look, write all this down. He was a changed man after 5 hours of being in our practice. You don't need to spend 5 hours in our practice. You just go on the YouTube and see the videos, and you'll see the answer to that. So what was the question again? I've lost the thread.
What do you see as the future of the veterinary industry?
Of course. Okay. Yeah, that's right. What is the future? Well, ultimately, it will be a good future, but they have to stop going on the course that they're on now. Mm. They will get the same uplift that I get once they really reject all the previous bad notions that inform their thinking. Once they see their patients really pick up their bed and walk. I mean, it's like that. You have these sick animals, sad, bedraggled creatures that brought in, and then you see them a couple of weeks later and they're bounding out of their skin. They're transformed. So ultimately, it will be fine. But in the interim, there needs to be political action and there needs to be legal action to get them to desist. Just appealing to their better nature doesn't work. The reason being they don't have a better nature. It is very serious. Most people in positions of power abuse that power. That's what the vets do. They very seriously abuse their power. And so that has to be called to account. And in that regard, I'm quite heartened because if you go to the petfoodcon.com, you can see campaigning for better pet health. And on that page, you will start to see some of the political actions being taken to bring this change about. And the House of, let me cough again, excuse me.
Sure.
The House of Commons EFRACOM committee invited me to make a submission to their pet welfare and abuse inquiry. Now, the House of Commons, we all know, is the lower house of the British Parliament, and EFRACOM is the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee that are now looking at pet welfare and abuse. I saw a video of them interviewing members of the British Veterinary Association, the PDSA, People's Dispensaries of Small Animals, and I thought, they're interested in looking at a subject that I've written a book on, 446 pages of it. And I sent them a copy. Didn't expect to hear. 10 days later, I did hear. They looked at the book. They looked at this one and decided that Lonsdale was somebody that they ought to hear from. So even though the expiry date for submissions had long gone in April, in July they said, "Hey, would you consider putting in a submission for public publication?" I said, "Most certainly," and my little fingers started to get to work on the keyboard, and I sent in a submission, and you can see that there.
Brilliant.
And it links also to two other submissions. One is to the vet workforce shortage in New South Wales, which is a global phenomenon, and another inquiry which is into the pounds. That's the council pounds. The what do you call them? Shelters. Shelters is the word you use. Mm-hmm. Right. So they're doing an inquiry into the shelters in New South Wales as well, because they're full to overflowing with all these people who've been watching the pet food ads and thinking, "Oh, I'll get a furry toy," and then they get the furry toy, and then they find that actually it chews the leg of the furniture and or um, runs away and doesn't behave as they would like it to, because the furry toy that they bought from the toy shop, we just sat there on the shelf and was nice and neat and clean and tidy. And then this other one, suddenly now it has all sorts of physiological, biological needs. Oh dear, can't cope with that. Into the pound. Right. So the pound's overflowing. So again, I made a submission to that as well. And they're all there. So this is starting to come to the fore.
Mm.
And so I would recommend people start to become active. We've got to become much, much more militant. We need to band together and bring class actions against the criminals. And for those of you over in the US of A, you're aware that Donald Trump and his co-conspirators are all being hauled up on RICO charges, racketeering, improper conduct and corrupt organizations act, for conspiracy to do bad things. Well, I suggest that you need to enforce the RICO acts against Mars, Nestle, Colgate, and the veterinary schools. The veterinary schools have knowingly been doing the wrong thing for a very long time. They lure in young, impressionable people and fill their heads with garbage. And they know it's garbage. We've got a new cartoon being created right now, and we're just perfecting it. And it's a picture of a zoo fence. So, and there's the fence. It's in a zoo. It's marked zoo. And on the one side, you've got a German wolf, an Alaskan wolf, and a Siberian wolf. Right, a German, Alaskan, and a Siberian wolf on one side of the fence. On the other side, you've got a German Shepherd, an Alaskan Malamute, and a Siberian Husky. And they're eating completely different things. Yeah. But both sides of the fence, the vets are advising. So they talk out of both sides of their mouths.
Right.
The German wolf, the Alaskan wolf, and the Siberian wolf are supposed to eat whole carcasses, but because they're on that side of the fence. But this fence is the demarcation. On this side, the German Shepherd, the Alaskan Malamute, which look precisely the same as, and their physiology is pretty much identical too. No, they have to be fed out of Mars, Nestle, and Colgate junk packets and cans. The hypocrisy is mind-blowing. Mm-hmm. The illegality of this. This is massively illegal, to deceive your consumers, defraud the public. It's hugely illegal for veterinary schools to take young people and render them stupid and ineffectual, and then send them out into the community filled up with all the wrong ideas that happen to coincide with the interests of their sponsors, right, who they're taking hush money from.
Right.
Just get high-ranking lawyers onto this, and we'll see a difference. Mm. I sent this book to a high-ranking lawyer for a publication on competition and consumer law. He agreed to review the book, but actually when he got it, he said, look, actually, it's not a law book as I thought it would be, with black letter law and detailed as to how to prosecute. And so he didn't review the book. But he said, it's not to say it's a bad book. On the contrary, it's an excellent book. I think it's a manifesto, and in part it's a diatribe, but it's an excellent book. So it is the foundation, I believe, for successful prosecutions of the vets and the junk pet foods. And I say, bring it on.
It's exciting to see that things could possibly change. It really is.
Well, if there's a will, there's a way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, there's a question I like to ask each of my guests, and I wonder if you'd be so gracious as to answer it for me this time. But one of the things I'd like to kind of look at is, in your experience, whether it's your own dogs or it's the dogs that you've seen in practice, what do you feel that dogs have taught you about what it means to be human?
Oh, well, it's taught me what a privilege it is to be human.
Mm.
It is extraordinary.
Mm.
Yeah, it's really very, very important. And once you start to appreciate the privilege that we've got, you can relate to them and recognize their specialties and be in awe of their athleticism, their visual acuity, their auditory acuity, their sense of smell, their sense of joy, their sense of what it is for them that makes them canines and what makes them.
They are gifts. Yeah.
Yeah. And even, silly little diminutive chihuahuas. Yes, they think they're wolves. They think they're big, powerful carnivores. You can't help but admire them
I know.
for their delusions, complete delusions. And, um, and yeah, I mean, I've got pictures. This was my secretary's dog, Gidget, and I remember her. This is Jed,
Oh,
and this is where he was a baby, and here he is when he's grown up.
beautiful. Yeah. 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 I am of the opinion that dogs are our biggest teachers in many respects when they come into our lives. And as I had mentioned to you before we started recording, that I had gone to see the curandero who told me that I needed to be on the lookout for dogs and cats that crossed my path because they were healers for me and teachers for me. And I don't think I realized what that really meant until this little 4.3 kilo wolf came into my home. And as you said, he definitely thinks he is, and has taught me more than I could ever show him gratitude for.
That's right, so therefore you owe him in return the very best you can do. And for
Absolutely.
them, the very best in their mind is to be able to rip and tear and chew at
Absolutely.
the key to the carnivore code, the raw meaty bones. And I'll just reach for this thing here and look at this abomination. So I'm now bringing in a degree of negativity, but I found this in the paddock the other day, and this is what our society does to those animals that so crave to rip and tear and chew. And they make plastic bones, and you can, if you can see this thing,
Yeah.
and if I bring it closer to the camera, you
Yeah.
can see some poor dog, not mine, but somebody it had been sinking its canine teeth into this thing at the NZ, desperate to try and get some benefit, but being cheated all the way through. So that's what we do with the modified wolves. We cheat them, we defraud them, we deny them what they need. So just turn that around, stop feeding out of the can packet, feed them raw meaty bones. You will have a happy, healthy carnivore, and your spirits will be uplifted too.
I think that's the absolute perfect way to end this conversation. That's just beautiful. I couldn't agree more with you. Dr. Tom Lonsdale, thank you so much for joining us today. I know people are going to take away so much, and I will absolutely leave links to your books, your website, etc., so they can dive in and learn all they want to learn about how to feed your dogs raw meaty bones. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Alexia. You're a pal. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me in this conversation with Dr. Tom Lonsdale. I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed speaking with him. It was such an honor, and I'm so grateful that he took the time to share his story and his wisdom with us. What are your takeaways from this episode? Come on over to Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama and let me know. And also let me know what other questions you have about feeding your dog or topics you want me to cover in future episodes to help you live your best Mystic Dog Mama or Papa life with your own pup. I'm all ears. You can find out all you want to know about Dr. Tom Lonsdale's work, books, and videos by visiting his website, thepetfoodcon.com. I've left the link in the show notes. All right, until next time.